The first requirement is that we preserve all of the tissue surfaces recorded in the impression and all the anatomical landmarks of the impression. And to do this, we want to end up with a landing, or what we call a boxing edge, of about 3 or 4 millimeters thickness all the way around the master cast. Now what I have done on one side is drawn a pencil line on the inside of that landing or boxing edge, and everything from that line toward the center of the cast is actually representing tissue surfaces. And everything from the pencil line outward is artifact. It's very important not to over-trim a master cast, because if we, for instance, over-trimmed in this area into, say, an area such as this, we would actually be encroaching upon tissue surfaces, and there's no possible way of completing the denture and having the denture fit over that portion of the mouth. A second requirement of a master cast is the thickness of the base. Now, as a general rule, we say that the base should be at least a ½ an inch thick. If it is too thin, we will have insufficient strength, and the master cast can easily break during manipulation or during the compression of the acrylic resin during the later stages of the making of the complete denture bases. If the master cast is too thick, number one, it will not fit in the articulator properly, and number two, if it is too thick, it will not fit in the processing flask in which the denture bases are made. So there are reasons for having the base a certain thickness, and as a general rule, about 1/2 of an inch thick. Now, the lower master cast is basically the same. Regardless of which method you use to prepare the master cast, we want to end up with the same configuration. In the lower, the requirement is that the tongue space be flat. Also, we should have a landing or boxing edge, again, all the way around the master cast, even width about 3 or 4 millimeters, as we said before. And all of the tissue surfaces must be preserved. And again, in the lower, I have simply outlined the junction of the end of the tissue surface and the beginning of the boxing edge, or the artifact. When we wax the dentures and when the dentures are processed, this tells us exactly where the border of the denture should be. So in trimming the final master cast, regardless of which method you use, we want to end up with this configuration. Now, the first step in boxing the maxillary impression is to add a boxing strip or rope around the periphery of the impression itself. Now, what I have in my hand is something similar to what you ended up with in the first exercise. It is actually a compound preliminary tray, impression or tray. And in the clinical situation, we go back to the mouth with the final impression material and make in this a final impression. So we will consider this morning and in your exercise as the final impression. And from this we will make a master cast. The first step is to, by using a boxing rope, a square piece of wax, which will be furnished to you, those of you who desire to use this method for making your master cast, and adapting that rope around the peripheries of the master cast. At this point, I should point out to you that the rope should be soft. And in the laboratory with all of the Bunsen burners and under these television lights, there's no problem. In the usual situation, the wax often has to be warmed over a flame slightly so that there's working consistency to this red wax and you don't distort any of the borders of your impression. You can see that adapts very nicely. Now, it is very important where this wax strip is added. If it is too low on the impression, we will have the borders of the impression embedded in the stone. As a general rule, this wax strip is kept only a millimeter or two below the border of the impression. And then as the two ends are joined, with a warm spatula, they can be sealed together. And at this point, when the rope has been satisfactorily added all the way around, the wax strip can be sealed to the material of the impression with a hot number 7 spatula. Now, if this strip were added to the compound in an area such as this is considered too low on the impression. And as you can see, or can imagine, if this area were poured in stone or cast in stone, that this whole area of the flange would be embedded in the stone. And this would result in the master cast of having a very deep area along where the border area that I'm pointing out here, and it would make it difficult for the rest of the procedures, such as waxing the denture or even making base plates. So let's get that wax strip up where it belongs. Millimeter or two below the border of the impression. And again, simply by heating the number 7 spatula, the wax is sealed to the impression so the mixture of stones does not escape. Now, to point this out, this is important to point out better, I have prepared a second model, and this wax strip is added correctly. So as I slowly rotate this, I want you to observe the position of the wax rope to the border of the impression. As a general guide, a couple of millimeters below the top of the border. Notice how it also makes the contour of the notches. Follows the general contour all the way around the impression. The next step in this procedure, and this can be done very quickly, after experience of a couple of times, a maxillary impression can be boxed within a couple of minutes. The next step, and the final step really, is to take a boxing strip, the flat wax strips, which we'll also supply for those who desire to make the master cast in this manner. And this should also be softened and inflamed so it has complete workability. In this case, under these lights, there's no problem, and I suppose there would be no problem in the laboratory. But if the wax is stiff, it simply should be heated. Now, this wax strip is added in such a way is that we get the proper thickness to our stone model when we pour up the cast. And in a moment, you can see how that is effective. Now, we simply lightly place the wax strip around the impression once to tell ourselves whether we have done it correctly or not. In this case, you can see the wax strips don't meet, and as I put it on the table, I can see that the impression is not sitting level on the table. So I simply open the strip up again, and it might take a couple of times to do this, but what I'm thinking in my mind is, by the way I put this on here, will I end up with the top of the cast approximately parallel to the residual alveolar ridges as a guideline. And once again, wrap it around. I think this time I'm going to be a little closer. And as I look at this from all directions, looking straight down on it, I can see that by pouring stone in here up to the top of this, I will certainly have enough thickness, so that's one requirement. The second is, I think the top will be approximately parallel to the residual alveolar ridges in the final impression. So at this time, simply seal the edges of the wax strips that we have just added, and all it really takes is simply one movement of the hot spatula across that edge, and one movement of the spatula across this edge. And the last step is to seal this outside strip to the rope, wax rope. And in order not to interfere with the border of the impression, or burn the borders of the impression with the hot spatula, such as moving it inside of the project, let's turn it over and seal it from the underside of the impression. So we'll simply go all the way around and seal the wax rope to the outside strip. Now, because we have worked with this wax and the wax is quite soft, the last step that is necessary before we cast the impression is to pour some cold water in this, and this will make the wax rigid once again, and will hold the desired shape that we want for the master cast. That's all it takes to seal the impression all the way around. Now we have a boxed maxillary impression. As I said before, it's a very quick method, and it will require a minimum amount of trimming in the model trimmer when we're done. At this point, as I said before, this wax is very flexible because it has been warm in the room where we worked. We will simply pour this full of cold water for a moment, dump all the water out, and prepare our stone for the mix. Now, as Dr. Schwartz mentioned before, making these master casts, we used dental stone. Not improved dental stone or not plaster, but dental stone, the yellow stone, with a water powder ratio of 100 grams of powder to 30 cc's of water. I would suggest, in pouring up the impression, that we double that and use 200 grams of stone and 60 cc's of water. Makes the proper mix. And in this boxed impression, we'll pour the material on the vibrator into one of the areas of the boxed impression constantly. Keep an even flow from the spatula and let the material move around, pushing the air ahead of it. Instead of just adding a large amount of stone in the middle and vibrating it, we add it in one of the heel areas, for instance, and add all the material in that area. Let the stone flow and fill it up without trapping any air. At this time, I will demonstrate what the final product looks like. Here's a boxed maxillary impression that has been prepared ahead of time, and it has been poured in the manner we just mentioned. After it is set, and let it set for about a half an hour. Don't take it out too soon. It is simply recovered by removing the wax strips that we added before. That's the outside strip. We still have the rope that we've added. This is getting pretty soft. I think I can get it off here. This usually, if it's cool or chilled, this comes off very easily also. And now, to recover the final impression, if it is compound, all we have to do is put this in warm water for a few seconds. The compound once again becomes soft and simply pulls off. If we're using an acrylic resin tray, such as you will on the lower, if we have any undercuts, it's not quite as simple as putting it in cold water. And what we do there is simply remove all the wax and ignite the acrylic resin base. And it will flame and become soft. And then we extinguish the flame and simply pry off the acrylic resin base. It will become very soft at that point. But the compound, all you have to do is lower it in some warm water. Remember this, particularly using the acrylic resin materials. It's very easy to break the master cast, and if any chipping or breaking of the master cast takes place, then we have to go back and take a new final impression. The master cast cannot be altered in any way. Now the last step is to remove the impression from the cast, and then we go to the model trimmer and do any final trimming of the, it will be minimal because we have done this with our wax, but we'll do any final trimming at the peripheries to establish the even boxing edge. The boxing edge, once again, comes from the boxing strip that we used, the boxing rope that we used initially. The last step is to go to the model trimmer and arbitrarily make the back part, the top of the cast parallel to the residual alveolar ridges. And at this time also establish the thickness to approximately 1/2 of an inch. And at this time we will recover and finish our master cast.